Only after Diane Keaton passed away did the public come to a shocking realization about the true faces of Duke and Dexter, the two adopted children she had once loved wholeheartedly. In 2024, after signing her will to divide her assets between Dexter and Duke, Diane faced a series of illnesses: skin cancer, eating disorders, and then pneumonia that left her health severely weakened. While her mother grew weaker day by day, the two children left her alone in the empty house and only appeared to pressure her into selling the Brentwood home, a place Diane had cherished for 15 years. She watched them leave with no hug, no promise to return. In the diary found after her death, Diane left words that silence the world. "I loved with all my heart. But perhaps that love wasn't enough to keep anyone here. Dexter and Duke no longer want to call me mother." How did Diane live her final months in solitude? How did the adopted children betray her love? Explore through the video. A year before her death, at age 78, Diane Keaton sat in the living room, bathed in warm golden light of her old Los Angeles home. Outside, the afternoon sun drifted through the orange trees in the garden, falling as quiet patches of light on the worn wooden floor. On the table lay a thick stack of documents, lawyers' papers and the silver fountain pen she had used for years. Everything was so silent that she could hear the ticking of the clock in the corner. That day, she signed the final will of her life, a decision she had pondered for months, torn between reason and emotion, between a life full of spotlight and a heart that always felt empty. Diane Keaton's assets totaled $100 million, including homes imbued with artistic soul, photographs, scripts, and memories she had collected over more than half a century living in Hollywood. She had no spouse, no life partner beside her at the end. Everything she left behind, she decided to place in a trust entirely for the two adopted children she loved most, Dexter and Duke. She wanted to ensure that when she departed, they were not only protected financially, but also felt the silent love their mother had for them. When John, Diane's personal lawyer, asked if she wanted to set up a charity, she nodded. Leave 30% of the net assets to the Keaton Light Foundation, a fund for single mothers and older artists in the American film industry, people who once shone under the lights, then died quietly. She had met them, seen the pain of being forgotten after only a brief moment of shine. John wrote quickly, eyes moist. She added, "If I can leave anything, let it be something gentle. Not for me, but for those who have never stood in the light." As John read each clause aloud, she sat in silence, feeling light in her chest. He asked if she wanted to include anyone else in the will. She shook her head. "No, everyone who passed through my life already has their share. Al remains in memory, Woody in the madness, and the two children in my heart. The only part that cannot be measured by money." John smiled kindly and asked, "Would you like to leave a personal message?" She thought for a moment and replied, "If the two ask who I left more to, write that I divided my love fairly only in the way each one needed. One needed the past, one needed the future." When all procedures were completed, she signed her name, Diane Hall Keaton. Her signature trembled but was clear and decisive. Throughout her life, she had signed hundreds of contracts, thousands of photographs, but never had her hand felt so heavy. Perhaps because this was the first time she was signing to leave her entire life behind. A strange emotion spread through her chest. Neither relief nor sadness. It was like completing a final performance. And the director had called cut. She looked down at the will where the final words read, "To my children, Dexter and Duke, with love always." The letters trembled just like her hand. She knew that from that moment an important chapter of her life had closed. That evening, Diane sat by the window sipping a glass of red wine. On the table were photographs of Dexter at age 10, the girl smiling brightly in her mother's arms, and Duke as a small boy, often hiding behind her skirt whenever strangers appeared. "I've taken care of you," she whispered, voice choked. "I just hope you understand. Money was never what I wanted to leave the most." But Diane did not know that this decision about the will would bring countless sorrows into her life. The truth is that Diane loved her two adopted children deeply. From adopting Dexter in 1996, then Duke in 2001, Diane Keaton had stepped into a completely new chapter of her life. For years as an actress, she had played countless women, lovers, lonely women, dreamers, but only when holding Dexter in her arms did she truly understand what it meant to live for someone else. Diane learned to be a mother alone bit by bit through sleepless nights and mornings filled with children's laughter. She later said, "I don't think I knew how to be a mother. I just knew how to love my children with everything I had." The early years were not easy. Diane often held a child while reading scripts, making milk, learning to distinguish the cries, hunger, pain, or just wanting to be held. Whenever Dexter was sick, she stayed up all night by the bed, placing a cold cloth on her forehead, quietly singing an old melody, whose name she herself could not remember. When Duke came to her, Diane was over 50, but she joked, "I'm not young anymore, but I still know how to hold a child without letting them fall." The two children grew up in a home full of books, film photos, and the smell of morning coffee. She taught them to see the world through eyes that feel, not just through eyes that look. As the children grew older, Diane maintained the habit of writing handwritten letters to each. Letters never sent, only kept in her desk drawer. In one, she wrote, "Dexter, you taught me to listen. Duke, you taught me patience. Thank you both for giving me a role I never want to end." Whenever returning from a busy film set, she would bring small stones from the filming location, a few rushed snapshots, she said, "so that later, wherever you go, you know, I still remember home." Diane's love for the two children was quiet, not dramatic like her roles, but persistent like the nightlights in the old house. She once confided to a close friend, "They say being a mother is a duty. But for me it's a miracle. I didn't give birth to them, but they gave birth to another part of me. And perhaps it was that love, pure, simple, unobserved by the public, that was Diane Keaton's most beautiful performance." However, contrary to Diane's love, her children grew more distant as they aged. The peak came right after the 2024 will was established. The red brick house in Brentwood, where Diane Keaton had lived for over a decade, became strangely empty. The windows still welcomed the golden sunlight as always. The black and white photos still hung on the walls. But the familiar laughter of Dexter and Duke had vanished. She often sat alone at the long wooden table, staring at the empty chair across from her. The house had once been the center of love, warm dinners, holiday roses, and jazz music. Now it only echoed the wind through thick brick walls. After Diane completed the asset division, leaving the trust for her children, everything seemed peaceful. She thought that would be enough. A mother taking care of her children until the last moment. But as time passed, the relationship slowly developed silent gaps. Calls became fewer. Visits only lasted a few hours. Some days she waited for a car at the gate in vain, only to receive a short text. "Mom, I'm too busy. Let's do it another day." One afternoon, Dexter arrived, her expression more serious than usual. She bluntly told her mother that the Brentwood house was too big, too expensive, and that she should sell it and divide the proceeds among the children. Diane froze. This house, the Pinterest house, as she jokingly called it, was not only a home, but the culmination of a lifetime of labor, love for architecture, and every brick personally chosen. She remembered every detail. The chandelier picked up from an old shop in Arizona, the Italian oak dining table, the sofa where Duke read all summer. But now everything seemed merely an object. Duke came later, calm but distant. He said, "Mom, this house is beautiful, but it's no longer where we belong. You should think about the future." Diane remained silent. She understood. Perhaps in her children's eyes, it was only property, but in her heart, it was memory. That evening, she sat by the window, watching the garden lights fade. The wind stirred the rose bushes, gently brushing the white curtains. For the first time in years, she felt small within her own home. When signing the papers to sell the house, Diane's hand trembled as it did when signing the will. Everything returns to the beginning, she thought. No children, no laughter, no shared dinners. The house would belong to someone else. Perhaps they would repaint the walls, tear down the rose garden, replace the old tiles, but she knew its soul remained hers. No one could buy the mornings she brewed coffee, the nights she read scripts, or the times she taught her children to draw with charcoal on the kitchen table. Diane's last public appearance was in 2024. By October 2025, after she had withdrawn from the public eye, those close to her began to notice the unusual silence. Skin cancer was the first disease that made Diane Keaton confront the real fear of death. When young, she had never cared about protecting her skin. The California sun was part of youth. long outdoor shoots and the natural beauty Hollywood of that time celebrated. Only after middle age did she notice strange spots on her skin. A small bump, a red mark that never went away. The biopsy results shocked her. Basal cell carcinoma, early stage, but not to be taken lightly. She had to remove the affected skin, leaving a small scar that she later skillfully hid under makeup. But the illness did not stop there. A few years later, squamous cell carcinoma appeared on her cheek, forcing another surgery. "I thought it was just a freckle," Diane once said in an interview. "But it turns out my body had been speaking for a long time. And I refused to listen." Illness completely changed her lifestyle. Diane began wearing long-sleeved shirts, wide-brimmed hats, even on cloudy days, always carrying sunscreen. But the damage was already evident. Her skin had become more fragile, prone to inflammation, and sensitive to light. Some mornings, even sunlight filtering through the window made her cheek ache. The spot where she had undergone surgery, once celebrated for her classic beauty, she now had to avoid light, live slowly, and be careful with every step outside. She once said, "I spent my youth in the sun and now I spent half my later life hiding from it." At the same time, another illness, an eating disorder, gradually eroded Diane's physical and mental strength. She admitted having suffered from it early in her career when the pressure to maintain a perfect figure made her obsessed with her weight. Some days Diane would eat an enormous amount. Pizza, bread, ice cream, anything she could find, and then immediately try to release it from her body by any means. It was a vicious cycle of guilt and fear. Although later treated, the damage left by bulimia was long-lasting. A weakened digestive system, worn teeth, and a body out of nutritional balance. She confessed to the Economic Times, "It was my way of punishing myself simply for not being perfect as people wanted." Old age arrived with many after effects from those years. Diane became increasingly thin, her muscles weakened, her bones ached when the cold came. Friends recalled that in her final months, she barely had the strength to walk the dog, a habit that had once brought joy every morning. Her body lost weight rapidly. Her skin turned pale and dry, and her voice became. She still tried to hide her fatigue with a faint smile and her familiar wide-brimmed hat. But anyone who knew Diane understood that her vitality had faded. Pneumonia finally delivered the last blow. But long before that, for many years, it had been the wounds from the sun, from the eating disorder, and from loneliness itself that silently drained the woman's strength. Yet, in her spacious Los Angeles home, no one lived with her. No caregivers, no visiting friends. Only old photographs and a few letters never sent. Dexter and Duke, the children Diane once cherished, taught to write, taught to love beauty, now had their own lives. They no longer kept in frequent contact with their mother, and there seemed to be unspoken things between them. After the inheritance division strained relationships, both avoided mentioning her in interviews, avoided visiting the old house, and even cut ties with close friends who had come to care for Diane. "They told me not to call anymore," a longtime friend recalled, saying that doctors and managers weren't necessary, that she was fine, but everyone knew she was far from fine. In the late summer days, Diane often sat by the window, curled in a thick blanket, looking out at the withered rose garden. She had once tended the flowers every morning. Now she barely had the strength to look. Doctors advised that someone be present, but she quietly said, "No need, I don't want to trouble anyone." In reality, no one was allowed to come. Not nurses, not housekeepers. The two children, citing cost management, had requested no personal doctor, no housekeeper, no overnight stays. She still tried to take care of everything herself. In the morning, Diane sipped a cold cup of coffee, opened her notebook, and wrote a few short lines. "I am still here. The world is still beautiful. But it is too quiet." In the afternoon, she tried to step into the garden, watching sunlight fall on the red bricks she had personally chosen when building the house. That house had once been a dream. Now it had become an empty, cold shell. Some days she called her children's names only to hear the sound echo between the walls. Dexter, Duke. The names came out softly like a breath, then vanished into the void. Old friends often knocked on the door, bringing food, medicine, or simply wanting to sit with her for a while. But the gate was always closed. They received short texts from her children. "Mom needs to rest. Please do not disturb." No one knew that inside Diane was left alone with weak breaths and persistent coughs. She had once been a strong, independent woman, but old age and illness slowed everything down, making life heavier than ever. On sleepless nights, she watched her old films. Annie Hall, Something's Got to Give, The Godfather. Laughing softly, sometimes she asked herself, that girl, was she happy? Then she would fall silent. The screen's light highlighted her gaunt face. Eyes still clear but full of sorrow. No one beside her. No voice calling mom. No hand holding hers. Only memories and the fragile breath of a woman who once captivated the world. Early on October 11, 225, a neighbor reported not seeing Diane in the garden as usual. Later that day, Los Angeles emergency services were called to her home around 8:08 a.m. in Brentwood and transported her by ambulance to the hospital. When staff entered the house, they found her sitting on a chair, a blanket draped over her, a notebook open beside a cold cup of coffee. By the time she arrived at the hospital, it was too late. Diane passed away at age 79. Her love for the two adopted children, Duke and Dexter, began years earlier. In a 1996 interview, Diane half-jokingly said, "I never married, not because I don't trust men. I just don't trust them to put up with me." The remark made audiences laugh, but behind it lay a sad truth. For Diane, marriage had never been a happy ending, only a role she did not want to play. She had loved, believed in lasting love beyond the spotlight, but when it all fell apart, the only thing left in her was the desire to be a mother. By the age of 50, many said Diane Keaton was too late to have children, but she believed her heart had never aged. She quietly went to an adoption center, hidden beneath her familiar fedora and black sunglasses. "Music, Hollywood will mock me again," she told a close friend. "But this time, I don't care." When holding her first child, Dexter, in her arms, Diane was speechless. The baby looked at her with clear, calm eyes, neither afraid nor distant. In that moment, Diane saw herself again, the little Keaton in 1955 standing in the schoolyard waiting for her mother, trembling yet full of hope. "We will live together," she whispered to the child. "I don't promise to be perfect, but I promise I won't leave you." 5 years later, Duke, her second child, came to her, a curly-haired, lively boy, radiant like a flame. When the social worker asked, "Are you sure? 2 children will be a big challenge," Diane just smiled. "I've survived 3 decades in Hollywood. Nothing scares me anymore." But she was wrong. Being a mother, she realized, has no script, no lighting, no one to adjust your hair or makeup when you collapse from exhaustion. Some nights Diane sang to the children in a hoarse voice, then wept in the dark. Some mornings she arrived at the set with dark circles under her eyes, pretending she was fine. "I have played hundreds of roles," she wrote. Al Pacino's lover, Woody Allen's betrayed woman, but being a mother is the only role I never want to end. Dexter grew calm and gentle while Duke was fiery and impulsive, like a mirror reflecting the intense part of her soul. Once when Dexter was 8, she asked, "Mom, why don't I have a father like the other kids?" Diane just smiled and stroked her hair. "Because I haven't found anyone good enough to be your father." The child nodded and whispered, quote, "Then I will protect you." Diane turned away, hiding her tears. She did not know that such pure love would eventually change. Hollywood still beckoned, still celebrated her as an immortal icon. But when the lights went out, the cold truth remained. Diane Keaton, the woman who once made the world believe in strength, lived and left alone. Perhaps deep inside, Diane understood that loneliness never truly disappears. It only changes form into the cold face of a daughter leaving in anger or the choking cry of a son. "You don't understand me, Mom." Yet, amidst these seemingly lost moments, there were still times that made Diane Keaton's life worthwhile. Dexter laughed when she clumsily baked cookies. Duke hugged her while watching The Godfather and asked curiously, "Mom, did you really like Al Pacino?" Diane laughed and replied, "Yes, but I've moved past it." When the two looked at each other and laughed, she realized that this was the truest part of her life. Not the red carpet, not the Oscars, not the elegant white gowns. Only the small kitchen, the smell of morning coffee, and the word mom calling in peace. But peace was never permanent in Hollywood. That world never lets go of anyone, especially those seeking true happiness. Diane was right to think so. Only a few years later, The children who had been her lifeline became the greatest challenge of her life. If there was a final confession, it would be that of a woman who dared to love, to raise, to fail, and dared to speak her truth before leaving this world. Dexter, gentle and quiet, always made the house silent when she smiled. Diane taught her piano art, hoping she would find her own world. Each night, seeing her child reading under the lamp, she saw her younger self. A girl afraid of noise, wanting only to hide in her own world. But then Hollywood pulled her away. In 2001, while filming in New York, Diane spent 12 hours on set, 3 hours traveling between cities, leaving only a few hours to mother. Dexter was only 11, and began to grow silent. She plastered her room with posters of rock bands her mother had never heard of. She wrote in her diary, locked it, forbidding anyone to read. Diane thought it was just adolescence. Until one December night in 2011, returning home late, still in makeup and costume, she found Dexter at the kitchen table. Headphones on. Diane asked, "Have you eaten?" No answer. She asked again, louder. The child removed the headphones, looked straight at her, and said, "You only ask because you have to. You were never really here." Diane was stunned. She softly replied, "I work for you, Dexter." The child immediately rebutted, voice sharp as a knife. "No, you work for yourself because you don't know how to live without applause." No words had ever hurt Diane so much. She stood in silence as her daughter turned away, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. That night, Diane sat on the sofa listening to a lonely guitar echo from her daughter's room. In the dark, she realized she had grown so used to being loved that she had forgotten how to love another person. In the years after, the distance between Diane and Dexter only widened. On TV, Diane still wore her fedora, still smiled brightly, still an icon of elegance. But inside, she was a silent storm. In 2004, when Dexter was 15, Diane took her to the Golden Globe Awards. The press called them Hollywood's most glamorous mother-daughter duo. But on the way home, Dexter whispered, "I hate how everyone looks at me like I'm my mother's jewelry." Diane remained silent. That remark followed her for years. By 2015, Dexter began to rebel. Instead of studying art as her mother hoped, she said she wanted to drop out and travel. Diane objected. "Do you want me to turn you into a copy of myself? A lonely woman among cups and hats?" Dexter shouted. Diane trembled and replied, "I just want you to have a safe future." The daughter looked straight at her and said, "No, you just want safety so you won't have to fear." In that moment, Diane slapped her, not hard, but enough to pierce her heart. Dexter looked at her, tears streaming, and left. For 3 weeks, mother and daughter spoke no words. 2 years later, Diane played a single mother in a new film. The press praised her as a feminist icon. But in one scene, when her co-star shouted, "You never understood me," Diane cried, not because of the role, but because the words were true. When the director called cut, everyone clapped, but she only bowed, trembling, wondering if anyone heard her real sobs amidst the applause. In 2017, Diane received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Film Institute. Bright lights, thunderous applause. But when she looked to the front row where Dexter always sat, it was empty. She still smiled, delivered her thank you speech. But inside all the glory suddenly felt meaningless. That night, she went home, opened the fridge, and took out a bottle of old wine. She drank one glass, then another. In her tipsy state, Diane realized she could play any role except the role of a perfect mother. In 2021, when Dexter married, people asked if she was proud. She smiled, saying yes, but with a quiet fear. For she knew her daughter had truly stepped out of her shadow forever. All her life, people called her a woman who needs no man. But few knew that to have a child, she had sacrificed her career, fame, and a part of herself. She thought she had endured enough of a mother's pain until Duke, the younger adopted son, entered her life. She adopted Duke in 2001 when he had just turned 1. At that time, she was filming Town and Country, and Dexter was 5. Duke had a bright, sunny smile, soft curls, and a laugh that made the house burst with life. She believed it was a gift from God, the chance to start anew. She taught him to ride a bike, play piano, and each time she heard him call Mom, her heart felt light, as if time could reverse. The once cold house suddenly filled with warmth. And she thought, Perhaps peace had finally arrived. Yet children grow faster than one expects. In 2013, when Duke turned 12, his gaze began to change, hiding within it a fury, an unnameable distance. He started skipping school, arguing with teachers, and gradually avoiding his mother. One night, she discovered him hanging out with friends, drinking, smoking, and posting inappropriate videos online. She shouted in despair, "What are you doing with your life?" Duke threw his backpack down and yelled, "Don't pretend you understand, all you know is acting." Those words pierced her heart like a knife. Exactly what Dexter had once said years ago. In 2015, Duke ran away from home for the first time. Police found him on Malibu Beach drunk, shivering in the cold rain. She rushed there, heart pounding in her chest. When she arrived, Duke sat on the sand, head bowed in silence. She did not scold him, only draped a coat over him and gently asked, "Are you cold?" Duke replied, voice choked. "Go home," she said. "No, I will stay." He looked up, tears blending with the rain. "If you really wanted to stay, you would have been here a long time ago." She froze. He was not talking about that night, but about the past 15 years. The years she had been absent from his life. She hugged him, but he did not hug back. At that moment, she realized some distances cannot be bridged, even by a mother's love. A week later, Duke returned to school, but only a few months after he dropped out again. Every conversation between mother and son became heavy like silent knives. One afternoon when she caught him smoking on the porch, she snatched the cigarette from his hand and shouted, "You can't destroy yourself like this." Duke looked straight into her eyes, speaking coldly, "You have no right to say that. You've been destroying yourself for years." He walked away, leaving a thick smoke like an accusation that would never end. In 2019, Duke had a minor car accident. She rushed to the hospital, sitting by his bedside the whole time. When he woke up, eyes red, he whispered, "Don't cry, Mom, I'm fine." She trembled and replied, "No, you're not fine, and I don't need to be a perfect mother anymore. I'm tired." She asked, "Do you hate me?" Duke was silent for a long while before saying, "No, I just don't know how to love you." Tears fell, and in that moment, she understood. His love had never disappeared, only buried beneath layers of fear and hurt. The 2020 pandemic brought the world to a halt. The Los Angeles house held only the two of them. For months, they lived together almost without speaking. One night, during a power outage, they ate noodles by candlelight. Duke smiled and said, "I hate being stuck at home, but if I have to be somewhere, this is still the safest place." She asked, "Are you still planning to leave?" Duke replied, "Yes, but not to run from you. To find myself again." The firelight cast on his face reminded her of old times. She whispered, "If you find yourself again, don't forget to look back. I'm still here." In 2023, Diane Keaton grew visibly weaker. Her hair had turned completely white. Her hands shook, her steps slow as if carrying the weight of all the years. She had once been a strong woman, stepping out of cars with a wide-brimmed hat, a radiant smile, and bright eyes, but now, just standing up exhausted her. She still brewed her own coffee each morning, still tended the roses in the garden corner, though she had to cling to the railing when stepping down the steps. Neighbors rarely saw her outside, and relatives visited only occasionally. In the red brick house, everything remained beautiful as before, only the owner was slowly fading away. At that time, Duke, the son she loved deeply, suddenly said he wanted to leave the US, go to Europe, to truly live. Diane froze. She looked at him, seeing in his eyes the youthful longing she once had, but also the shadow of departure. "How long will you be gone?" she asked. Voice weak, Duke replied, "I don't know, maybe a few months, maybe forever." She softly said, "I'm scared, Duke." He hugged her tightly, speaking firmly, "Don't be afraid. I told you leaving doesn't mean not loving." She trembled and replied, "I know, but I never learned to trust that." On the day Duke left, it was cold, the wind blowing strongly through Diane's white hair. She saw him off at the airport, holding his hand tightly, as if letting go would let the wind carry everything away. "Don't forget to call me," she whispered. Duke smiled. "I will call every day," she replied, voice choking. "Every time you miss me." Then he turned away, backpack on his shoulders, gradually disappearing behind the security gate. At that moment, Diane realized a bitter truth. Love cannot keep someone from leaving. It only makes you wait forever. And so she waited. Day after day. The phone did not ring. No messages came. In 2024, her health deteriorated seriously. Pneumonia made her cough persistently. Her breath short and weak. Dexter, her elder daughter, occasionally visited, but every meeting was brief and cold. "Mom, you should think about selling this house," she said. "Why keep it if it's expensive?" Diane remained silent. She knew the house was not just a residence, but a place holding her soul. But seeing her daughter's eyes cold as glass, she just nodded slightly. That nod felt like signing her own sentence of loneliness. Then one morning in October 2025, a neighbor noticed Diane's house had been closed for 3 days. No lights, no barking, no one answered when knocking. When police forced the door, they found her sitting in the chair by the window in her usual position. Blanket across her legs, notebook open on the table, coffee gone cold. She had quietly passed away, as if merely napping for a moment. No one knew exactly when she died. Perhaps the night before, perhaps 2 days earlier. Only that no one was beside her. When the news spread, people expected a grand funeral worthy of a legend's reputation. But Dexter and Duke declared that Mom wouldn't want noise and quietly held a private cremation. Inviting no friends, notifying no media. A few close colleagues called to attend, but were all refused. Some said they wanted to save funeral costs to complete the estate division faster. Only a few wreaths were hastily placed. A small handful of ashes quietly sent to the family cemetery with no eulogies or anyone calling her name one last time. The red brick house was later put up for sale. All of Diane's mementos, photos, books, paintings, even her beloved hat were cleared away. When the new buyers visited, they said the house was beautiful, but had a strangely sad feeling. Perhaps they did not know that this had once been the world of a woman who had lived fully. Loved, lost, and in the end was forgotten by the very people she had called family. And so 2025 closed in a painful silence. Diane Keaton passed away alone, without noise, without lights, with no one to see her off. Only the last words she had written in her diary remained. "I loved with all my heart." But perhaps that love wasn't enough to keep anyone here. Diane Keaton left this world quietly. But her legacy never faded. Throughout her life, she lived and loved in her own way. A single mother raising 2 children with deep love. A courageous artist. And a woman daring to confront the dark corners of herself. Even when in the end those she loved most left her, Diane chose to keep the one thing that could not be sold. Her kindness. The story of Diane Keaton makes one wonder sometimes. Does great love make a person lonelier? Do you love Diane as I do? The woman both strong and fragile. Brilliant and full of cracks. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you love heartfelt and moving stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue exploring stories about famous